Welcome to Stage on Screen, where television history, I believe, has just been made with a staggering 12 cliches in a single announcement.
I'd like to add one more, a heartfelt one, by saying how thrilled we are to be here this evening in the Roundabout Theatre Company's new home. I feel particularly grateful to the Roundabout, not just because of their commitment to presenting classic theatre, such as tonight's sparkling, light-hearted romp, The Man Who Came to Dinner, but more personally because Liam and I made our New York stage debuts and met for the first time during their 1993 production of Eugene O'Neill's Anna Christie.
Another sparkling, light-hearted romp.
O'Neill's dark story about immigrants couldn't be more different from tonight's offering, which takes place in the posh home of a well-to-do Midwestern family and overflows with witty banter, shameless name-dropping, and the childish behavior of sophisticated adults.
The Man Who Came to Dinner opened in New York at the Music Box Theatre on October 16th, 1939, to unanimous acclaim. Brooks Atkinson, the drama critic for the New York Times, wrote, "It is American in its comic tone, Broadway in its craftsmanship, and a roaring evening of literate hilarity into the bargain."
The play ran for 739 performances, which may not seem like much now, but was astonishing for an era in which 200 performances was considered a solid hit. Is there anything else we should say before the show begins?
Well, a quick note about the authors. When Kaufman and Hart wrote this play, they were the most successful writing team working in the American theatre. They'd won the Pulitzer Prize 3 years earlier for their now classic You Can't Take It With You. Also, they based the main character, Sheridan Whiteside, played tonight by the wonderful Nathan Lane, on their longtime friend, the writer, critic and radio personality, Alexander Woollcott, who was famous for his sardonic wit and his peevish temper.
A friend of Kaufman's rang him up at 9:30 one evening and asked what he was doing for dinner. "Digesting it," he replied. For us, that will come later. In the meantime, let's dig into the first course of tonight's rich comic feast as the curtain goes up on Act 1 of The Man Who Came to Dinner. As is the little rabbit in the sunshine. It almost makes your teeth ache, doesn't it? You might think that no one could really be that obnoxious, but in fact, a tendency to lapse into baby talk was just one of the many unappealing habits perpetrated by Alexander Woollcott, the real-life model for Sheridan Whiteside.
James Thurber dubbed him Old Vitriol and Violet. Harpo Marx thought he looked like a balloon that had gotten loose from the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade.
Noel Coward called him a caged cobra. Howard Dietz gave him the nickname Louisa May Woollcott.
And George S. Kaufman described him in the single word, improbable.
Barbarian.
Who's a Misa?
Definitely a barbarian. If you ever again attempt to serve me brandy in a dinky little glass like this, I shall be forced to take action. I may strangle you with my own hands, or I may merely shriek.
It won't happen again, sir.
Plump, owl-faced and acid-tongued, Woollcott began his career as a newspaperman and critic. His terse review for one unfortunate woman's book of poetry entitled "And I Shall Make Music" was "Not on my carpet, lady." He found fame and notoriety on the radio with his show The Town Crier, in which he mixed cruel cynicism with shameless pathos, the twin hallmarks of his personality.
Although many were terrified of him, Woollcott himself feared only one man, George S. Kaufman. That fear was mixed with admiration for Kaufman's razor-sharp mind and acerbic wit, especially when aimed at things theatrical. Woollcott took great delight in a remark his friend made to a woman who had talked non-stop throughout the first act of a play. "Madam, have you no unexpressed thoughts?" And often quoted a line from a review Kaufman wrote when he was a young critic at the New York Times. "I saw the play under bad conditions. The curtain was up."
The genesis of The Man Who Came to Dinner stemmed from a visit that Woollcott made some years earlier to Moss Hart's house in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. A house, incidentally, whose grounds were so extravagantly landscaped that Kaufman once remarked, "This is what God would have done if he'd had the money."
Hart had invited the portly terror to spend the night, and the playwright's own words. This he proceeded to do by immediately demanding my bedroom, all the heat in the house turned off, a frosted milkshake, a large tray of chocolate cake placed at his elbow for him to nibble on, and embarking upon a loud and unprintable discourse on the obvious dishonesty of my servants. Before leaving, Woollcott inscribed a note in the guest book, I wish to say that on my first visit to Moss Hart's house, I had one of the most unpleasant evenings I can ever recall having spent.
Later, while recounting the fiasco to Kaufman, Hart said, "Imagine if he'd broken his leg and had to stay." The partners looked at each other, and as Hart described it, both our rosy little faces lit up at the same time. The germ of the play had been born.
The result was a smash hit, which was made into a movie in 1942 and has been produced by amateurs as well as professionals all over the world, more than 5,000 times since its original Broadway run. The names Kaufman and Hart have become synonymous with a particular brand of urbane, literate comedy, sarcastic and breezy on the surface, a hint of sentiment at the core, and with an unerring sense of dramatic craftsmanship. In the years between their first collaboration in 1930 and both of their deaths in 1961, the partners produced such popular and enduring successes as Once in a Lifetime, Merrily We Roll Along, You Can't Take It With You, and of course, The Man Who Came to Dinner.
Before he started to work with Moss Hart, George S. Kaufman had already enjoyed a long career, first as a newspaperman, then as a playwright and director. For a while, he wore both hats simultaneously and more than once had a hit running on Broadway at the same time that he was a drama critic for the New York Times. Worried about the morality of what could have been seen as a conflict of interest, Kaufman was scrupulous about keeping any mention of his own work out of the Times' theatre column. The press agent for one of his plays once asked, "For God's sake, George, what do I have to do to get your own star's name in the paper?" "Shoot her," said Kaufman.
Known as the Great Collaborator, he worked with 16 different writers in the course of his career, including Ring Lardner, Edna Ferber, Mark Connolly, and Maury Riskant, and turned out dozens of plays, among them The Coconuts and The Animal Crackers for the Marx Brothers, June Moon, The Royal Family, Stage Door, and with the Gershwins of Thee I Sing, the first musical to win a Pulitzer Prize.
Hart went on to individual triumphs of his own as a playwright. Lady in the Dark, his homage to psychoanalysis comes to mind. As a director, most notably of the original Broadway production of My Fair Lady, and as an author, his autobiography, Act One, remains one of the funniest and most charming books ever written about the theatre. And yet, as a team, the two men seem to have had a special alchemy that consistently produced theatrical gold.